All right, everybody, welcome. We're here because we're concerned citizens of the East End, and we're here to inform you guys about Line 9 and the different challenges and problems that are facing this project. We're going to be showing a video by Rachel Deutsch right now that will give you a background about the project and some visual sort of information. And then there's a sign-up sheet going around if you want to stay in touch after the event.
To transport heavy oil, a category that includes tar sands. The tar sands are a mixture of sand, clay.
I think it's a good time to acknowledge the fact that we are right now on the traditional territory of Mississauga, of New Credit, and the Six Nations. Obviously, this is an Indigenous-led struggle against Line 9, and we appreciate the initiatives that have been taken here in Ontario, and obviously with other pipeline issues like in BC. There's been a huge amount of leadership that Indigenous people have demonstrated, and we're taking that seriously. My name is Brian Dale, and I was standing off to the side in a couple of those clips because I helped organize the event that was screened, that was shot there in November at U of T. And obviously we had some great speakers out then, and the conversation is continuing. I'm excited about the fact that I first heard about Line 9 partway through last summer, and there's been so much momentum gathering around this issue. And the conversation is not just about stopping Line 9, but having those bigger conversations about how and how do we move forward, and what are the better alternatives, and what's going on here. And so that's what we want to do today as well. And we've got three great speakers to help us do that. And this is Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma Kane, and I'm here as an East End resident. I'm also the chair of Sierra Club Ontario. And
use the mics.
We use the mics, yeah. You guys are happy. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to sit down and get situated. Hopefully everybody can hear me right now. Like I said, my name's Emma Kane, and I'm here, I'm the chair of Sierra Club Ontario, and I got involved with Line 9 because I'm a concerned East End resident, as you guys all are, hopefully. Here's our first presenter, which is Sabrina Bowman. She's a climate campaign coordinator for Environmental Defence, which is a Toronto-based NGO, and they're helping residents across Ontario voice their concern over the Line 9 project. She grew up here in the East End, and she's here to share with us her knowledge of the issues as well as her passion and commitment to encouraging neighborhood groups like ours. So, Sabrina?
Yeah. Hi everyone. As Emma mentioned, my name is Sabrina Bowman. I work with Environmental Defence, and we've actually been quite involved in Line 9 for about 4 years. Initially, when it was called the Trailbreaker Project, this was a proposal by Enbridge initially to reverse not only Line 9, but also work with the oil company that owns a second pipeline called the Portland-Montreal Pipeline, which runs from Montreal down to Portland, to reverse that one to eventually send tar sands through that pipeline for export down to the Gulf. That was proposed in 2008. It was quashed because it was 2008 and there was a little recession, and so it wasn't very profitable. But we started to get involved again when we saw a very quiet proposal by Enbridge to reverse the first part of Line 9, which runs from Sarnia to Westover in Hamilton, as an indicator that Trailbreaker was indeed still alive. So we've been working on this issue for a while, and I'm really delighted to be here. It's been my pleasure to work with groups such as this who are doing a ton on raising awareness about Line 9. So I want to start by saying this. It's been kind of a bad week for the oil industry. We had 4 spills. 2 CN rail spills. One was in White River, Ontario, and the other being near western Minnesota. There was an oil spill near Houston, Texas. There was also a frozen pipeline near the tar sands in Fort McMurray that was carrying toxic byproducts from a Suncor tar sands plant that exploded, leaked into the Athabasca River. Thousands and thousands of liters, leaked for about 4 hours before anyone really noticed. And then there was one more, which I'm sure you all read about in Arkansas, in Mayflower. It's a quiet suburb that woke up and found itself literally walking through liters and liters of bitumen, which is tar sands oil flowing through their quiet street. I saw one picture of a children's play set that had about a foot of bitumen kind of sloshing around there. You wouldn't really want your children to play in. This was the Pegasus pipeline, and this pipeline is scary and interesting because it was also reversed to send through tar sands oil, the way the reversal is being proposed for Line 9. And in 2009, it had been outfitted with spill-proof technology, which, well, we can all see how well that worked out. So, this is a bad week. Is this normal to have 4 major oil spills in 1 week? Maybe not normal, but spills from pipelines are pretty common. In fact, in Alberta alone, there's about 800 a year. The industry keeps saying, well, we're getting better, we're working on it, we're putting all this technology in, but spills are still happening. And in fact, no matter what the companies do, it's sort of hard to avoid because a lot of these spills happen from human error, people just not knowing that a pipeline is even there and sending a backhoe through it. So this is a continuing issue, and it's a continuing issue of concern. And something to say about this is that it's so uncertain in terms of safety. It kind of feels like the oil companies are gambling on the fact that they think it's going to work. Once again, we see our communities are being put at the table for their profit. And as somebody who lives in Toronto and who drinks the water, that makes me rather nervous. The Arkansas example is one more example of a sort of a disaster that we're probably going to see again. And to me, Line 9 is one more example of the companies being willing to play with fire, because at the end of the day, they're not so concerned about the results. And we are going to have to pay for them. We, as taxpayers, are going to have to pay for them. We'll have to pay for them with our health and with our natural surroundings and with our water. So the video did a really great job of explaining Line 9, so I won't go too much into it. Just to say a couple of major things, that Line 9 crosses every major waterway that flows into Lake Ontario, every single river, every single tributary. This is important because if there's a major oil spill in one of these tributaries, it won't take all that long for that oil to reach Lake Ontario, which affects our drinking water intakes. This is drinking water for millions of people in the province. It's a 38-year-old pipeline. This is an old pipeline. It was mentioned it was very similar to one in Marshall, Michigan, run by a company that has a terrible safety record, that has been actually unwilling to pay for all the costs associated with a lot of their spills. The one in Marshall, Michigan recently, there was a group that was working on natural studies to see sort of how the environment was coping with the major spill, and said Enbridge need to pay for it, and they said, well, we don't think so. We don't think it's necessary, because they're the experts in ecological health, I suppose, so they said they didn't want to pay, but this is sort of the attitude they have, and personally that makes me quite nervous. The other thing is the company denies that there's any difference between bitumen, which is the oil, the tar sands oil, and regular oil. There's a huge difference. Bitumen, diluted bitumen, which flows through, is more corrosive, it's worse for our health when it spills, and it's harder to clean up. Bitumen is more likely to sink in water, which means that it coats the bottom of rivers. You can't use traditional cleanup methods like booms and skimmers to clean it up. It doesn't work. That's why Kalamazoo still isn't clean, and the company says there's no difference. If they say there's no difference, they have no safety mechanisms to prepare for something if the spill happens. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well, and something that makes the company even more questionable. Currently, the Line 9 proposal is being reviewed by the National Energy Board. This is an independent government body that approves 99% of the projects across its desk in the oil, gas, and energy sectors. The proposal is a 15-month process that it goes through, except that the window for public participation is approximately 2 weeks, which is happening right now. You have to apply to participate, which means that if you're not selected by the National Energy Board to have your thoughts heard, you don't get to comment. So that is how you get to participate according to the official processes. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I think there's hope here. Who's heard of the Northern Gateway Pipeline proposal? Just put it, show of hands. Okay, So I'd say almost everybody in the room. It's a pipeline proposal to send a pipeline through British Columbia and then to send tar sands oil through off the coast in a very dangerous manner. Over a year ago, very few people had heard about this pipeline, but because of the incredible movement that was built there with Indigenous folks, with individuals, with organizations, with communities, coming together and saying, no, now most of the province doesn't want it. This project, which looked like it was going to be absolutely going to go right through, is now teetering on failure. And we want to see the same thing happen here. And in fact, we're starting to see a similar movement building for Line 9. It's really exciting. We've got the East End group, we've got the West End group here. We've got groups in Sarnia, KW in Guelph, in Kingston, in Ottawa, in Montreal, all around the GTA, Burlington, Ajax, Hamilton, and of course in the city. We have municipalities starting to stand up and take notice, which is really exciting. Cities, Toronto, Ajax, Kingston, among others, have already either passed resolutions, have created reports, or have at the very least discussed Line 9, so we know that it's on their radar. This is really encouraging, but as somebody mentioned earlier, the Northern Gateway and other movements like this, they take time and they take participation. So I just want to finish off by saying very quickly that this isn't going to stop through the National Energy Board process alone. I would like to think that when Environmental Defense goes and speaks about the various problems with this pipeline at the National Energy Board, it'll change their minds and they'll say, no, we're not going to do it. But given the 99% approval rate, I'm not so sure about that. What I do think is going to stop it is people coming together in rooms like this, talking to their neighbors, talking to their friends, and saying, no, we will not allow this through our backyards. We will not take on the risk for the oil company's profit because we do not want to pay for it. There's no benefit to us, and it is a danger to our health and our communities. So I'm going to encourage you today to sign up with the East End group and get involved with them. It's a lot of great people. I also want to quickly talk about this day of canvassing that's coming up, April 20th. We're going to have a really fun day. We're going to have some music and some food and some training. We're going to bring a bunch of people out to go into their neighborhoods, knock on doors, and talk to their neighbors about Line 9. It's going to be really great. We know that it's a little bit scary, so we're going to pair people up and we're going to have lots of training, and it's going to be a good day, lots of people, lots of experience, and this is a coalition of different groups coming together to do this canvassing day. You can sign up out at the tables out there, and it's just a one-day event that could be repeated hopefully, but for the first one we'd love to have you out. As I say, please do join the East End group, they're doing great work, and keep talking about it. You know, the more we talk about it, the more we stand up and say no, the more likely it is it'll be defeated. Thank you.
I'll introduce Ron Plain, our next speaker. Ron Plain is Ron Plain is widely known as a tireless defender of his people, the Aamjiwnaang First Nation in Sarnia, against the worst ecological contamination on the continent. He's been grappling with the evils of Line 9 and its associated refineries for decades. When Enbridge launched its plan to equip Line 9 for tar sands transmission, Ron traveled repeatedly to Toronto and elsewhere to put his experience and knowledge at the service of the movement here, and it's thanks to Ron that I first heard about Line 9 last summer. And Ron said at one point that youth are the stewards of the land. So when the youth of Aamjiwnaang joined the Idle No More protests recently, he was quick to lend his support. And on their requests, Ron became a spokesperson for their movement. For that, he's been unfairly singled out for judicial reprisal. And you might have seen articles that we've sent out about this. So we join today in defending Ron's political rights and welcome him as one of our own. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you. It's good coming out to the East End because I usually go downtown, and when we go downtown we can write on a piece of paper the names of the people that will show up, and there's a fair group that will show up, but it's consistently the same people. So to come to a new area and see new faces fuels me to keep going, because it's a struggle. My community is called the most polluted spot in North America by National Geographic. It's a pretty bold statement and a pretty credible publication. 2 years later, the World Health Organization said we had the most contaminated air in this country. Again, a really bold statement and a very credible organization. I've been to Fort Chip, I've toured the tar sands, I've been to the fracking sites in Fort St. John and in the United States. I've seen some of the worst that these companies can do to this country, and then I come home. And we're kind of shielded in Aamjiwnaang because we don't see the big open pit mine. Or we don't see the derricks, and we don't have the contamination of our water because we pull our water from way out in Lake Huron. So we're north of the plants. When we pull the water in, we're safe. We're as safe as can be, I guess. What we have is the infrastructure of the petrochemical industry in North America. There's pipes that go from my home to East Los Angeles. There are hundreds of pipes that go from my home here to Toronto, on to Ottawa, into the airport at Buttonville and down at the island because we process the jet fuel and we send it to them directly now. I first brought the attention of Line 9 up about 4 years ago. Everybody was talking about Northern Gateway, and I was fairly optimistic that Northern Gateway wouldn't go through. That's not to say let up on that fight at all, because as soon as we take the foot off the gas, they'll take advantage, but right now momentum's in our way here. As a result of the Northern Gateway, the Harper government slashed tribal council funding across the country. The Carriacakina Tribal Council led the fight, the Northern Gateway. They were the communication media between the communities on the ground who don't have high speed, who don't have the internet, who don't have newspapers. Carriacakina made sure those communities knew what was going on. And as vengeful as the Prime Minister can be, he slashed funding for tribal councils right across the country. I work for the Southern First Nations Secretariat, which is a tribal council. Last week, we had $380,000 cut from our budget. 4 positions are gone. Next year, we won't exist anymore. And he's done that because we are the communications between the inside and the outside. We bring information and resource people in, and we bring people out to tell stories. But unlike Fort Chippewa and Fort Mackay, Aamjiwnaang is a pretty urbanized reserve. We are completely surrounded by the city of Sarnia and by the petrochemical industry. The impact of living inside of there goes to the core of being an Anishinaabeg man or Anishinaabeg woman. When I was a child, nobody ever said to me, Ronnie, let's go for a teaching today. My uncle or my grandpa or my daddy would say, let's go for fishing. And while we're out fishing, I would learn the stories of my family, I would learn the history of my people, I would learn how to be a good Anishinaabeg man, how to tend to my responsibilities. And my sisters would hear the same teachings from aunties and grandmas. There is nowhere left in our territory that's available to us anymore. We can't fish, we can't eat the fish. We can't hunt, we can't eat the deer. We can't use the medicines on the ground. We can't even use the cedar in our medicines because the cedar's been found to have cadmium in it. So every aspect of our life, a part of being Anishinaabe, is taken from us. 63 petrochemical refineries surround us like the walls surround us here. And in between all of that is Canadian National Railway. A Canadian National Railway in Sarnia is the worst polluter in Chemical Valley, and we've got the who's who of Chemical Valley there. CN wins. Because CN was, up until 1995, a Crown corporation. They didn't have to pay attention to safety. They have no environmental protections used against them. They're isolated by the Crown corporation and the rules that went around it. But in 1995, they stopped being a Crown corporation and became a publicly traded company. However, they were able to maintain their special statuses. Does Walmart have a federally sanctioned police force? No. Does McDonald's have a federally sanctioned police force? No. but CN does. And a CN police officer, if you live within 500 meters on either side of a track, so there's a kilometer, does not need a search warrant to come into your house. He can just walk right in because it's in that act, the Railway Safety Act. Remember that the next time you're talking to your MP and ask them why a Crown corporation or a private corporation has a police force. It's germane to this story because a couple of years ago, the Assembly of First Nations put out a call for us to block railroad tracks. That was our Aboriginal Day stunt. And a few of us did. Most notably, Sean McKnight and Tyendinaga, who ended up, or not Sean McKnight, Sean Grant.
Yeah, Sean
Brandt, not Grant, sorry. And he's still today facing legal ramifications from that because everybody abandoned him when he was the scapegoat. We blocked the Suncor track that leads into Suncor that crosses our street. And within about a half an hour, a federal injunction was issued to have us removed. But we were gone before the CN police showed up to serve it on us, so they never got to serve it on us. This year, if you remember, on the 21st of December, it was quite a horrible day. There was cold, icy rain hitting, and from Toronto to Ottawa, or even Sarnia to Ottawa, the highways were a mess. And we were sending down a couple of buses of our youth to go to Ottawa to one of the big Idle No More rallies. So our chief and one of the councillors set up a day-long blockade on one of CN's tracks, the same track that we had blocked a couple of years prior. And they said they were putting the blockade up just for the day as a show of support for those people on the bus. And they would leave it up to see that the people on the bus were safe coming home. And when they were home, they were going to dismantle. And it generated a lot of support right away inside the community. And the youth took over the roadblock, or the rail blockade. They said, no, it's not coming down. We're going to leave it up, and we're going to honor Chief Spence, and we're going to honor the treaty, and we're going to ask that treaties be fulfilled across the country, which was Chief Spence's message. First thing the next morning, a Saturday morning, was the first time I had shown up there. And the CN police had just dropped off the injunction, signed by a guy named David Brown here in Toronto. And the injunction said that we had to get off of mile marker blah, 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 blah of CN's spur line, of the St. Clair spur line, which was the crossing that we were at. So I said to the youth, I said, all right, let's pack up and move up to the next crossing. That nullifies this. And they don't have a permit to cross that crossing. So they can't get an injunction to remove us from a track that is illegally down on our territory. And the blockade moved. This was the 22nd of December, and it was bitterly cold. Social media was an amazing tool for that blockade. I mean, within hours, friends and supporters from everywhere were sending us messages about the blockade. By the end of that weekend, we had 50 people at that blockade, mostly from other places other than Aamjiwnaang. The youth asked if I would be a spokesperson for them because I know how to get certain things into the media now and again. And it exploded. We were in the Wall Street Journal in a Chinese state paper on the very same day. That's huge. They said we cost them $5 million a day. That's how much we cost CN by blocking that line. There was a lot of action around that, and I cannot count the good that came out of that within our community. But there was also a lot of very nefarious things exposed. One of the first things that happened was a girl called me up and she said she had the original papers or copies of the original papers that documented the tracks and that whole area of Sarnia was illegally taken from Aamjiwnaang in 1919. She had the paperwork. She went to the archives in Ottawa. She got all the paperwork. It was all part of the Ipperwash inquiry. So we put that information out. And she ended up getting harassing phone calls from my chief in council. How dare she put this out? I had a guy, the former worker at CN, call me up and he says, you got to come over. I got to talk to you. I got some stuff that we were going to release and you've just beat us to the punch. So I went and saw him, and he was a very disgruntled, medium-level CN employee. And what he had in his arsenal of CN secrets was pretty astounding. But he was going to release all of the sites across Canada that were illegal sites for CN, using ours first, because ours is the most critical. It feeds the spur line that takes the chemicals to the United States. So there's only 2 places in all of Ontario that do that, and we're one of them. Through him, I was hooked up with another guy, a very senior level CN guy, who just blew me away. Judge David Brown, he says, was a former CN lawyer. Judge David Brown has signed numerous injunctions on behalf of CN. He's the on-call judge. We didn't pay attention to the injunctions because I stood very firmly on the fact that the track is illegal. And what I learned in my education on injunctions was what they've done is they got what's called an ex parte injunction, which means they've proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are right and we are wrong, enough that the judge will issue an injunction to remove us. But how could they do that if I had paperwork that proved I was right? He took them at their word, at best. On the back page of that injunction, which was served on the 22nd of December, it listed my chief and Aamjiwnaang First Nation as being named in the suit, not Ron. But I got a phone call, or sorry, an email at 3:30 in the afternoon on New Year's Day saying that I had to appear the next morning in court to face civil contempt charges. I actually got a Facebook message from CN's lawyers saying that I have to appear in court, and they consider this proper service under the law. And the courts allowed it, so it now is. They can cite my case as an acceptance because nobody appealed it. So as humorous as it is now another sad state of the Canadian judicial, because somebody can say, well, they didn't appeal it on the plain case, so it went through. They can Facebook you and service you. I didn't know there was 2 types of contempt, criminal and civil. Under criminal contempt, the Crown steps forward and charges me with contempt of a court order. And there's a finite fine they can give me, and a finite amount of time in jail they can give me. On a civil contempt, that is indefinite. CN can right now today call the Crown, call Judge Brown, and tell them that they have a deep-rooted fear that I am going to continue to be an activist my entire life, and that will threaten their tracks. And they can have me jailed indefinitely. This is Guantanamo Bay type crap. Yeah. This is in Canadian law. This is right now today. They can fine me a ceilingless amount of fines. $65 million is what they say that blockade cost them. They can fine me that. So I show up in court on the 1st, or the 2nd, sorry. I've got about 6 hours, or thereabouts, to actually do something. And on the back page of that injunction, it says if I intend on appearing in court, I'm supposed to give them 24 hours notice of who my lawyers are. I didn't have 24 hours. I had to be in court the next morning. So I went to the court and I said to first I called my lawyers and my lawyers said, you don't have to go. But I went anyways. I'm not going to show disrespect to the court when it didn't earn it. They're being played like I'm being played in a process to benefit CN. I didn't know about the Judge Brown stuff at the time. So I showed up in court and I told the judge exactly that. It's out of my respect for your position that I'm here. And I had with me 235 pages of documents that showed absolutely that the tracks are illegal. And following proper court procedures, we had a copy for their lawyers, we had a copy for the court, we had a copy for the media, we had a copy for ourselves. And the judge wouldn't let me admit that in court as evidence. CN got to say to the judge, they're blocking the tracks again, and he issued an injunction to get them off. I had proof that said that they're trespassing, and I'm not allowed to enter this in. And the judge said that if this is an Indian land claim, then it needs to go through certain procedures, and that the chief has to do it. Well, that's not true at all. And it wasn't an Indian land claim, it's just an out-and-out trespassing. Why, if it's on Indian land, does it have to have this special distinction? They're trespassing on my land. It didn't matter. The judge said, you know, by 6 o'clock tonight, that blockade's coming down. And I said, I'm not the boss of the blockade. I was asked to be a spokesperson. I can't tell you it's going to come down. By 6 o'clock that night, it's coming down, or the chief of police and I am going to jail. That's all there was to it. I asked where my chief was. Why aren't they there? They're the ones named. And the CN lawyer said, in an effort to maintain good relations with Aamjiwnaang, they won't be pursuing charges against them. In other words, I got thrown under the bus, or train as it were. To this date, my chief and counsel will not discuss this. They just won't. They started the blockade and ran. So I phoned around for lawyers, because I don't have any money. CN told me if I gave them a $5,000 donation to a charity of their choice in their name, they would drop everything on me. Kind of. I wasn't going to do that. I'm not in contempt of a court order, or maybe I am in contempt of a court order, but the order was illegal. My chief didn't show up in court, never has shown up in court, and nothing's ever happened out of that. My wife got death threats. People would send her messages on Facebook and then delete the account right after the threat was made. My mother's watching her mother pass away from cancer while all this is going on. CN says it wants to come at me for $180,000 to $200,000 in fines. That's what they want me to pay. I might as well just sign my house over. I'm the only person charged as a result of an Idle No More activist or action. My chief is on video nationally saying that he supports Idle No More and the entire movement, yet ensured that his legal fees would be covered through the band and mine wouldn't. The stress on my family has been massive. In 2010, we filed suit against Suncor, the Ontario government, and the federal government through a charter challenge based on Chemical Valley and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'm the only one of those live-off reserve whose house could be held if we lose. We basically have said to the Canadian government, we all have a right to breathe fresh air. We all have a right to walk out this door and not worry about what we're breathing in. That's a basic human right. That's going to cost your money, millions upon millions of dollars. You should see the lawyers in their room. So we have those people coming after my house, and over on this side now we have CN saying they want my house. Well, they say they want $200,000, so they might as well just take my mortgage. But the story won't stop. It started out every day I was doing 4 and 5 interviews about this, and now we're down to 1 a week. I'm doing an interview about what's going on in CN. When I go back to court on May 24th, I'm sure it will come back up into the news. But I'll leave it here in that while I was phoning around looking for attorneys, 3 attorneys said they would represent me. And they've made me an offer you can't refuse. I have to pay expenses. And in the retaining letter, it states in it that what's raised is what's going to be charged. So they're not going to make it cost me a penny for a lawyer, and that in itself is a huge offer from these attorneys. One of the attorneys, Chris Reed, was the attorney for KI. You remember Big Trout Lake with the whole fight with Plant Nix, and the chief and the council went to jail, and a few years ago anyways, the corporation Plant Nix threatened one of the band members with an injunction to have him removed from his own land. And the community, the chief and council, stood up and locked arms in front of that man, and they said, you're not going after him, you're going after us. Chris was their lawyer. And when I told him what was happening with me, he said, that's the exact opposite, isn't it? My chief and counsel went, here you go, and locked arms. CN expected me to be really, really quiet, and, put my head down and walk away and feel bad. It just pissed me off. Because they're going to do it to you. And maybe you don't have the resources or the technical people, maybe you just don't have the stamina or the stubbornness to keep moving forward, but I'm not going to let them do this to me because they're going to do it to you. They're making it so that we can't afford justice. We can't afford to do the things that we need to do to protect ourselves. Line 9 blows me away because it runs through so many different properties. And the people whose property that it's running under have no idea that it's even there. So how are they going to react when there's a spill? You know, Sabrina mentioned the thing about Arkansas down there. Exxon has now had bitumen classed as not oil, so they don't have to pay for the cleanup. They got to watch what they're doing. I mean, I love social media because we all know about this. So is it oil or isn't it oil? Does it become oil when it crosses the Canadian border back into Canada? Because if they call it oil over here, it's going to hang them over there. I went to the Enbridge meetings with the NEB a couple of weeks ago. I'll just finish with this last point. Enbridge lied on its first application. It lied blatantly and outright on its first application to the NEB. It stated that it would not be putting bitumen through that line. It stated that in the application. They say, but we put it in this application now. But you still lied on that application. And you got approvals based on that lie. And I'm not going to say that they wouldn't have gotten approval if the lie didn't exist, but there might have been a little bit more stringent conditions put upon that approval. But they lied. They admitted and they lied on a public application. So I looked at the man from the NEB and I pointed to the forms in the corner for expenses and I said, I'm going to fill this out for the most I'm going to get, and I'm going to take my friends and we're going to go to Vegas and we're not going to bother coming at all because apparently it's okay to lie on an application. It's not against the law. Enbridge will not be punished for lying on that NEB application. It's not going to end quickly. I'm Turtle Clan. And the hardest thing for a turtle to do is ask for help. We'll lay on our back and die before we'll say, give us a hand. They want me to pay $200,000 in fines. My lawyers are estimating if this goes right through, it's going to cost $50,000 to $60,000 in witnesses, experts, research, and time. I need your help. I'll keep doing what I'm doing either way. It's not an and or anything to do with, there's people that have stepped up that are just blowing me away with the support that I'm getting, but I need your help. And thank you for it.
Introduce our final presenter, which is Angus. He's an internationally known writer and speaker, and he presents on the effective action we can take to bring climate change under control and to grant justice to its victims. He draws on his decades of experience as a social activist to edit hand. Angus.
Thank you for coming. Thank you to everybody for inviting me to speak. I actually live in Eastern Ontario, so more the East End than this. I live just a few kilometers north of where Line 9 crosses several rivers. So I've got a personal stake in this, I guess. But that's not what I want to talk about. Often, when you go to meetings at the environment, it's almost a cliche that at some point somebody will get up and say, you have to think global but act local. Or sometimes grammatically, think globally and act locally. Well, it's an easy thing to say, but it's not always easy to do, because it's not always clear that local projects and things we do in our backyards and our neighborhoods can affect the growing global environmental crisis. And even when there is a clear link, it's seldom easy to decide which local projects should get priority. There are so many that we could all be involved in. What I want to suggest is that the campaign against Line 9 stands out as an exception to that difficulty. This is a project that has profound local, national, and global implications. By resisting the pipeline through Toronto, through East York, you are directly engaged in a fight for humanity's future. And the link is extraordinarily clear. Now, the local links, the local impacts of pipelines are very clear to all of us, and you've heard about some of them today. All of us cannot resist mentioning Mayflower, Arkansas, where just this past weekend, families were forced to abandon their homes when an Exxon pipeline burst, spilling thousands of gallons of Alberta bitumen into their yards. If you go onto YouTube, you can see a video that a cameraman took a low-flying plane and flew over the area to show you the entire area and how the oil is spreading out through the water and the yards and so on. And it's good to know that Exxon has solved that problem. They've got together with the Federal Aviation Administration and banned flights over Mayflower. It's literally true. It's a no-fly zone. As Stephen Harper shuts down environmental monitoring because if you can't see it, it's not there. That's what they're doing in Mayflower, Arkansas, and any number of other places. Pipeline spills are not the exception. Between 1990 and 2005, there were, and this is reported, 4,679 pipeline spills in Alberta alone. That's about one a week. And that's before the current pipeline boom. And that's only one side of the story. One of the things that constantly shocks me about this is the spill damage that we are talking about here are caused by system failures. But what's even more frightening is the danger that comes when the system doesn't fail. It's even more destructive when it works properly. When a pipeline bursts, it harms the immediate area, often in a devastating fashion. When it doesn't break, it delivers devastation to the entire world. Just after he became Prime Minister in 2006, Stephen Harper spoke at a business meeting in the UK. And he announced at that meeting his intention, his government's intention, of making Canada what he called an energy superpower. Canada, he said, was already, quote, the 5th largest energy producer in the world, ranking 3rd in gas production, 7th in oil, and 1st in hydroelectric and uranium. But that, he said, is just the beginning because, quote, an ocean of oil-soaked sand lies under the muskeg of northern Alberta. This next bit is a quote from Stephen Harper. The oil sands are the 2nd largest oil deposit in the world, bigger than Iraq, Iran, or Russia, exceeded only by Saudi Arabia. Digging the bitumen out of the ground, squeezing out the oil and converting it into synthetic crude, he said, is a monumental challenge. Continuing the quote, it requires vast amounts of capital, Brobdingnagian, I love that word, Brobdingnagian technology, and an army of skilled workers. In short, it is an enterprise of epic proportions, said Stephen Harper, akin only to the building of the pyramids or China's Great Wall, but bigger. That's Stephen Harper bragging. Now, what Stephen Harper did not say at that meeting is that unlike building the pyramids or the Great Wall of China, squeezing out the oil and converting it into synthetic crude is a massively destructive action. Last week, Waterloo University professor Thomas Homer Dixon wrote an article for the New York Times, and he said, tar sands production is one of the world's most environmentally damaging activities. It wrecks vast areas of boreal forest through surface mining and subsurface production. It sucks up huge quantities of water from local rivers. It turns it into toxic waste, and it dumps the contaminated water into tailings ponds that now cover nearly 70 square miles. Now that's appalling enough, that we have the world's most destructive local project in northern Alberta. But the damage goes far beyond Alberta. The Alberta tar sands contain more than twice as much carbon dioxide as has been emitted by all of the oil burned in all of human history to date. The tar sands alone could contribute twice as much CO2, twice as much greenhouse gas to our atmosphere as all the oil burned to date. At the global climate negotiations, it's been pretty much universally agreed that we must keep global warming to less than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial level in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. The scientists who disagree with that 2-degree figure don't disagree on the high side, they disagree on the other side. They say the number should be lower. And certainly the small island states say that if global warming goes to 1.5 degrees, we're already at 0.8. If it goes to 1.5 degrees, their countries will disappear. If the tar sands are fully exploited, there is no chance that the world can stay below 2 degrees. No chance at all if the tar sands are fully exploited. James Hansen, perhaps the world's leading climate scientist, who, by the way, last week retired from NASA so that he could devote full time to fighting his own government, which he could not as a government employee. James Hansen said recently, if the tar sands are fully mined, it will be game over for the climate. He said, burning all the tar sands oil will mean, and this is a quote from Jim Hansen, concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would reach levels higher than in the Pliocene level more than 2.5 million years ago, when the sea level was at least 50 feet higher than it is now. The level of heat-trapping gases would assure that the disintegration of the ice sheets would accelerate out of control. Sea levels would rise and destroy coastal cities. Global temperatures would become intolerable. 20 to 50% of the planet's species would be driven into extinction, and civilization would be at risk. That's what will happen if the tar sands are fully exploited. Ruined lands, poisoned rivers, millions if not billions of deaths. That's the price the world will pay if Canada continues its drive to be an energy superpower. 5 years in succession, international environmentalists have named Canada as the country that did the most to, quote, delay, stall, and otherwise disrupt negotiations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. During the UN Climate Conference in Copenhagen in 2009, 400 non-governmental organizations declared that Canada had the worst emission control record of any industrialized country. And in an act of truly appalling hypocrisy and cynicism, in December 2011, the government announced Canada's withdrawal from the Kyoto Protocol. But it only did it after it attended a meeting of the signatories where Canada again sabotaged any move by other countries towards emissions reductions. They knew ahead of time, they said ahead of time they were going to withdraw. But they attended a meeting they had no intention of accepting any of its decisions. They attended only to wreck the process. You know, having been a radical my whole life, I sort of, you get kind of torn, and I don't like to think of myself really as a patriot. I think of myself as part of the world. But I've always kind of felt proud about Canada some ways. And it's bloody hard. Yes. It's harder and harder to be proud of living in this place. It's a wonderful country, but we are ruled by bastards. Today, most Canadian oil exports go to the United States, but there's a growing concern in the oil industry that the United States may not be the world's most reliable customer. Canada's conventional oil production is falling fast. Between 1990 and 2005, conventional oil production in Canada fell from 1,200 to 1,050 barrels a day. It's expected to fall to less than 600 barrels a day by 2020. We're running out of conventional oil. So all production growth is coming from the tar sands. That means that when US environmentalists campaign against dirty oil, that poses a direct threat to the Canadian oil industry. And the Obama government's decision to delay the Keystone XL pipeline confirmed the Tories and the oil industry's unease about relying on US markets. That's why the East-West pipelines. The Harper government is still actively lobbying, as you know, on a huge basis to get the US politicians to okay the Keystone and to block laws that might discriminate against dirty oil from the north. But it is also seeking new customers. Last year at the Davos conference, Stephen Harper said, quote, "We will make it a national priority to ensure that we have the capacity to export our energy products beyond the United States." Now, they may be trying to keep Line 9 low profile, but it's a national priority for their government and for the oil industry. The Northern Gateway Pipeline in the west and the Line 9 project in the east are essential elements of that plan to allow them to exploit the tar sands to the absolute maximum. And that's why your campaign against Line 9 is an essential element of the global campaign to save the climate. As Jim Hansen writes, today we are faced with the need to achieve rapid reductions in global fuel emissions and to nearly phase out fossil fuel emissions by the middle of the century. 37 years. Instead of contributing to that process, Canada's government is actively promoting increased fossil fuel production. When the level of CO2 is already at a level where dangerous climate change is on the agenda, and extremely close to the level where catastrophic climate change is at the level, to aim to double oil production of the dirtiest oil in the world by 2020, which is the stated goal, can only be labeled a crime against the planet and a crime against humanity. Climate change is a runaway train, and our children are on the track. The fossil fuel industry, with our government support, is feverishly shoveling in more coal, or I guess more bitumen. The fight to stop Line 9 is a local campaign, but it's also part of the global campaign to pull the emergency brake and stop that runaway train. Thank you.